The bucket sits in the corner of your garage, covered in dust, empty, forgotten. You probably bought it years ago for some project that never happened. Maybe it held paint once or carried tools. Or just sat there, useless, waiting for the day you'd finally throw it out. But that bucket is not what you think it is. It's not trash. It's not storage. It's not just another piece of plastic taking up space. That bucket is a farm, and it can grow enough food to feed your family through winter when the grocery stores are stripped bare and the supply chain snap like frozen rope. Most people will never see it. They'll walk past buckets at the hardware store without a second thought. They lines spend thousands of dollars on groceries every year while empty containers sit in their basement gathering cobwebs. They lines panic when prices spike and shelves go empty because they never realized they were sitting on the solution the entire time. But you're different because in the next few minutes, you're going to learn something most gardeners will never understand. That the most powerful food production system in the world doesn't require acres of land or perfect soil or expensive raised beds or any of the things the gardening industry has convinced you that you need. It requires a bucket, just a simple 5-gallon bucket. The kind you can buy for $3 at any hardware store. The kind that exists in almost every garage, shed, and basement in America right now, doing nothing. And once you understand what that bucket can do, you'll never look at container gardening the same way again. Here's what nobody tells you about growing food. The ground is not your friend. It's filled with compacted clay that drowns roots, or sandy soil that drains too fast, or contaminated dirt that's been poisoned by decades of chemicals and runoff. It's crawling with pests that eat your seedlings before they break the surface. It's locked in frost for half the year. And it's permanent, which means if you choose the wrong spot, you're stuck with it. But a bucket has none of those problems. A bucket is portable. You can move it into sunlight when the season changes. You can bring it inside when frost threatens. You can carry it to a new house when you relocate. You can arrange 20 buckets in a pattern that maximizes every square foot of sunlight on your patio, balcony, or driveway without ever touching dirt. A bucket is controllable. You decide what soil goes in. You decide when it gets watered. You decide what nutrients feed the plant. You eliminate every variable that makes traditional gardening a gamble, and you create perfect conditions where plants don't just survive, they explode. And here's the part that changes everything. A bucket grows more food per square foot than almost any garden bed in existence. Because when you force a plant to grow down instead of out, when you fill that bucket with loose, fertile soil that roots can penetrate effortlessly, when you water consistently and feed regularly without competition from weeds or neighboring plants stealing resources, that single container becomes a production engine that outperforms sprawling gardens 3 times its size. One tomato plant in a 5-gallon bucket can produce 30 pounds of fruit in a season. One potato bucket can yield 15 pounds of carbs. One pepper plant can give you 50 peppers. And when you multiply that across 22 different vegetables that thrive in containers, you're looking at hundreds of pounds of fresh food from a collection of buckets that fits on a small patio. But most people never try it because they've been taught that real gardening requires land. That serious food production means tilling soil and building raised beds and committing to permanent infrastructure. That containers are for flowers and herbs, not for feeding a family. And that belief keeps them dependent on a food system that could collapse at any moment. Here's the truth. The average family spends over $8,000 a year on groceries. And every single dollar goes to a supply chain that stretches thousands of miles, depends on fuel that gets more expensive every month, and breaks down the moment anything goes wrong. You saw it during the pandemic, empty shelves. Limits on purchases, panic buying. Lines around the block, and it will happen again. Not because of a virus next time. Maybe it's a fuel shortage. Maybe it's a crop failure. Maybe it's a transportation strike or a natural disaster or a financial crisis that makes food unaffordable even when it is available. The reason doesn't matter. What matters is that when it happens, The people with 20 buckets of vegetables growing outside their door will eat. And the people who thought gardening was too hard or didn't have space or were waiting for the perfect time to start will go hungry. So let us talk about the 22 vegetables that can turn those dusty buckets in your garage into a year-round food supply that makes you independent from a system you should have never trusted in the first place. The first vegetable is tomatoes, and before you say you already know about growing tomatoes in pots, understand this. Most people fail at container tomatoes because they use pots that are too small. A tomato plant needs space for its roots to spread deep and wide. It needs consistent moisture. It needs support as it grows tall and heavy with fruit. A 5-gallon bucket gives you all of that. Fill it with a mix of compost, peat moss, and perlite for drainage. Drill 5 holes in the bottom so water doesn't pool and rot the roots. Plant one indeterminate tomato seedling in the center. Drive a 6-foot stake into the soil next to it or use a tomato cage to support the plant as it climbs. Water it deeply every morning. Feed it with diluted fish emulsion or compost tea every 2 weeks. And watch that single plant produce fruit for 4 straight months. You'll get 30 pounds of tomatoes from 1 bucket. Fresh tomatoes for salads in June, tomatoes for sandwiches in July, tomatoes for canning sauce in August, and tomatoes still ripening on the vine in September when the neighbors' gardens are finished and dead. That's not luck, that's the power of container growing when you do it right. The second vegetable is peppers. Bell peppers, jalapagos, habaneros, sweet banana peppers. Every variety thrives in buckets because peppers love warm soil and consistent moisture, and containers give you complete control over both. 1 pepper plant per 5-gallon bucket. Same soil mix as tomatoes, same drainage holes. But peppers need heat, so place the buckets in the hottest spot you have. Against a south-facing wall where sunlight reflects off brick or concrete. On black asphalt that radiates warmth into the roots. Peppers grow slowly at first. They'll sit there for weeks looking small and fragile while you wonder if you wasted your time. But once they hit their stride in midsummer, they explode. Each plant will give you 40 to 60 peppers depending on the variety. You'll have more peppers than you know what to do with. Fresh peppers for stir-fries, roasted peppers for freezing, dried peppers for winter soups, and enough jalapagos to make salsa that lasts until spring. The third vegetable is lettuce, and this is where bucket growing proves it's not just for summer crops. Lettuce hates heat, it bolts in the sun and turns bitter, but it loves cool weather, which means you can grow it in spring and fall when tomatoes won't even germinate. And because buckets are portable, you can move them into shade during summer or into a garage during winter to extend the season even further. Use a wider bucket for lettuce. A 3-gallon works better than a 5 because lettuce roots are shallow. Fill it with rich compost mixed with a little sand for drainage. Sow seeds densely across the surface, then thin them to 2 inches apart once they sprout. Here's the secret. Harvest lettuce by cutting outer leaves instead of pulling the whole plant. Leave the center intact and it will keep producing new growth for 2 to 3 months from a single planting. 1 bucket gives you continuous fresh salad greens without ever buying that plastic box of wilted lettuce from the store again. And when you plant lettuce every 3 weeks in different buckets, you create a rotation where one is always ready to harvest while another is growing and another is just being planted. That's fresh greens from March through November with 0 gaps. The fourth vegetable is carrots. Most people think carrots need deep garden beds. They don't. They need deep, loose soil, and a 5-gallon bucket filled with sandy compost gives you exactly that. The trick with carrots is using the right variety. Skip the long varieties like Imperator that need 12 inches of depth. Go for shorter types like Danvers or Chantenay that max out at 6 to 8 inches. They grow fat and sweet and tender in buckets without any of the forking or twisting you get in clay soil. Sow carrot seeds directly into the bucket in early spring. Thin them to 1 inch apart once they germinate. Keep the soil consistently moist but never waterlogged. And in 70 days, Lines pull carrots that are sweeter than anything you've ever bought because freshness is flavor, and these went from soil to table in 10 minutes. One bucket yields about 3 pounds of carrots. Plant 5 buckets in succession 2 weeks apart, and you'll have fresh carrots from May through October. The fifth vegetable is potatoes, and this is where bucket growing becomes legendary. Potatoes are the ultimate survival crop. High in calories, easy to store, versatile in the kitchen, and they grow like weeds in containers if you use the layering method that turns a single bucket into a vertical farm. Start with a 5-gallon bucket, drill drainage holes. Add 4 inches of soil in the bottom. Place to seed potatoes on top, cover with 4 more inches of soil. When the plants grow 6 inches tall, add another layer of soil to cover half the stem. The buried stem will sprout new roots, and those roots will grow more potatoes. Repeat this process every time the plant grows another 6 inches until the bucket is full. This technique is called hilling, and it's how commercial potato farmers maximize yield. But in a bucket, it's effortless. You're just adding soil every couple weeks while the plant does the work. By the time the plant flowers and the foliage starts to die back, that bucket is packed with potatoes from top to bottom. Tip it over, sift through the soil, and pull out 12 to 15 pounds of fresh potatoes that will store in a cool, dark place for 6 months. 3 buckets of potatoes grown in succession give you a year's worth of carbs from 60 square feet of space. The sixth vegetable is green beans. Bush beans are perfect for buckets because they grow compact and produce heavily without needing support. One 5-gallon bucket holds 3 plants, and those 3 plants will give you continuous harvests for 8 weeks straight if you keep picking the pods. Beans need warm soil to germinate, so don't plant until 2 weeks after the last frost. Fill the bucket with compost-rich soil. Plant 3 seeds spaced evenly around the edge. Water deeply but infrequently because beans hate wet feet. Once they start producing, pick beans every other day. The more you harvest, the more the plant produces. Miss a few days and the pods get tough and the plant stops flowering. But stay consistent and those 3 plants will flood you with tender green beans all summer long. 1 bucket gives you about 5 pounds of beans per planting. Run 3 buckets in succession 2 weeks apart, and you'll have fresh beans from June through September. The seventh vegetable is cucumbers. People avoid growing cucumbers in containers because they think the vines need too much space. But there are compact bush varieties bred specifically for pots, and they produce just as heavily as sprawling types without taking over your patio. Use a 5-gallon bucket, 1 plant, soil rich in compost because cucumbers are heavy feeders. Place the bucket in full sun and keep the soil consistently moist because cucumbers are 95% water and they need constant hydration to stay crisp. Train the vine up a small trellis or let it spill over the edge of the bucket. Either way works. And within 60 days, you'll be harvesting cucumbers faster than you can eat them. 1 plant produces 20 to 30 cucumbers over a 6-week period. That's fresh cucumbers for salads, cucumbers for pickling, cucumbers for sharing with neighbors who can't believe you grew them in a bucket.